Welcome to the Litigation Room, where it happens, a Rivero Mestre podcast.
Hi, my name is Jorge Mestre. I'm here with my law partners, Andres Rivero and Amanda McGovern, and we want to talk about a topic that's very important to our firm, diversity and inclusion. We're extremely pleased to announce that we've been recognized by Chambers as the 2020 Outstanding Firm for Furthering Diversity and Inclusion in the United States, and we couldn't be prouder of our team. So Andres and I have been working together for almost 20 years now. Andres, I'll ask you, in your view, how did we get here?
George and I started on this enterprise. The main thing was to build a business and to do a really great job in litigation. But it can't escape anyone's attention. We both obviously have Hispanic names, and in fact, we're both Miami-born Cuban Americans. And we do a lot of work cross-border to Latin America. So, number one, from the perspective of who we are, and two, from the perspective of what we do, it was natural that we would start to add, in particular, Spanish speakers, Portuguese speakers, and people with Spanish and Portuguese language cultural abilities. But we've had great success in bringing on board African Americans, women, other members of other minority groups over time. So I tend to think that the reason that we've ended up building an inclusive group is because we're both from an ethnic minority group, because our work calls for skills that would be more among Hispanic, not limited to, but more among U.S. Hispanics. But besides that, because we found the way we work is we try to be very creative in what we're doing. And studies show, and we've certainly found this as an experience, that having, a diverse group racially, ethnically, religiously, in terms of gender, in terms of sexual preference, we think it may be sometimes chaotic, but we think we come up with some really interesting creative solutions that we don't believe we would otherwise.
So Amanda, I know that you agree with us that diversity and inclusion is really important. Can you share with us a little bit about why you think that?
I've said this to both of you guys so many times, I think from the first day that you gave me the opportunity to join you. And that is, it's extremely important to me. It's part of my life. It's part of my family's life. It's why I'm here in Miami. But more than anything else, it's the future. I always ask myself, what is my legacy? What is our legacy? It's got to be something bigger than what we are. It's got to be something bigger than what we do. It can't simply be that we're coming to work every day and we're just getting through the day, right? We've got to have something bigger than that. And at least from my perspective, to the extent that I can work in a firm like this that allows everybody to be who they are, even if sometimes things take a little bit longer to get to the final conclusion, I'm so proud of that work.
I'll add a little bit to that. I think I agree with both of you. To me, diversity in the legal profession is critically important. And I think it's critically important because the legal profession itself really stands for due process and fairness. And if you believe that that's true, and I do believe that's true, then diversity in the legal profession really matters, because we can't have a truly equal and fair legal system without a diverse legal profession. And of course, now more than ever, in these times that we're living in, that has to be a priority. And it's certainly a priority for us. Andres, I wanted to ask you, we've built a very diverse team here. And of course, there's always the business case for why a diverse team is important. Having and keeping the best talent advances business interests, and people make that argument. There's also the fairness case for diversity. And I think that, I want competition. I want competition in this firm. I want competition across professions and businesses and across our society. But I want that competition to be fair. I'm looking for a real meritocracy. And I think that sometimes implicit bias gets in the way of that. I know that we've tried to change the setting, change the dynamics, and I think we've been successful at that. But what do you think about how we've built this team?
think we've thought outside the box for the reasons I was mentioning before, because we're a bit outside the box anyway. But I know that, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but one of our lawyers was somebody that I was introduced to by a friend here in Miami who has been fantastic. I'll mention him, John Kozak, who's always mentoring minority students. So he introduced me to this young man, and he wouldn't, if just, and appearances do matter. On appearances, he wouldn't be your ideal candidate. Just, a set of things. And there are implicit biases in these kind of things. I think we are more open to different kinds of people. As I talked to this young man, I realized he was very talented, very smart guy. And then I learned that he had won a national moot court competition. And we took a chance on him. He was just a brand new lawyer, didn't have a job when at the time he had already graduated from law school. And that young man won the under 7-year trial competition done by the Dade County Bar his first year. He's a really fine oral advocate and has just come up with some extraordinary solutions to problems over the last 9 years. Just a fantastic lawyer. I think that a lot of firms in Miami or elsewhere wouldn't have given him a second look. So I really do think that implicit bias can cause firms to suffer because they don't recognize real talent because of appearances of people. Or, frankly, it's also pedigree in certain ways, educational and the rest. So I think that you've got to be open to other possibilities to get the best. This is a very diverse country. The talent is not limited to any single group. If you want to get the best talent, you got to look everywhere.
I think that's right. I mean, particularly if you look at, I think what you're also referring to, and I'm a firm believer in this, is there has to be an opportunity. You have to give people that otherwise might not have an opportunity, an opportunity. And I'm not even talking about an opportunity for a job. I'm talking about an opportunity for an interview, an opportunity for a lunch, a conversation. Sometimes it's harder to get to the bottom of who that person is. Why? Because we build up our own walls when we're protecting ourselves. When we don't think that we can be ourselves, we have to be part of the majority. You really can come across as detached, uninterested, not passionate, disengaged. And you know what? You got to dig. Because you give that person a chance, and if it truly is a meritocracy, everybody wins. At the end of the day, diversity is simply a different way of looking at it. It's changing the narrative, it's looking at it from a different perspective, and I think also it's recognizing that what previously worked isn't necessarily going to work at the same level going forward.
Amanda, if I can jump in on what you're saying, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, look, I know, we pay attention to what folks who do what we do, how they're hiring the rest. And it seems like they're chasing the same limited pool of people all the time. And why wouldn't you want to expand that pool and give yourself a chance to identify other equally talented people just because they may come from a different place, they may look a different way, they may sound a different way. There's a lot of different things. But why wouldn't you give yourself a chance to find the best talent? To me, that's the critical thing.
So we have a diverse team, and I think that diverse team has really been the impetus for our success and our ability to come up with the creative ideas that I think are our stock in trade. But I'm curious if either of you have any specific examples that someone listening now could take and apply to their law firm or business in terms of how has this diversity helped you in your everyday practice?
Starting and working with both of you, I find that every single time I talk about a problem, every single time, there's a different way to look at it. And you know what? I'm not kidding. When I start the conversation with you, I'm not sure there is. And in the beginning, when you give me the different perspective, I'm not sure I agree with you. But then when we engage in the conversation and we actually flesh it out, you realize, of course, there's a different way to look at it. And every single time I read a pleading or I see an oral argument and I hear that perspective as a different perspective, a different way to look at the same problem, that is really the true measure, I think, of exceptional legal representation. At the end of the day, I love the fact that this firm has been able to succeed with such a diverse team. But I also very much love the fact that through that diversity, we are working at the top level for our clients.
Well, I think what you're saying is absolutely true, and I certainly feel that way, Amanda. A lot of times in our conversations, I'll by the end of the conversation just be, looking at things a different way from where I started. But I'll give you a very concrete example. About 10 years ago, maybe it was 11 years ago, we had a case for Chevron where you may have heard of it. It was related to oil development in Ecuador, and there was a movie made about it called Crude, and it's been a huge controversy. At some point in that process, we were defending a senior executive in the Ecuadorian operation, and one of our bright young lawyers came up with the idea of trying to get the outtakes of the movie. And I heard that, and I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. How are we going to do that? And another of our bright lawyers, I'll tell you who it was, Ana Munoz, who's now the senior counsel at Qatar Gas in Qatar, said, let's use 1782, which I had not heard of. And we ended up participating in an extraordinarily successful 1782 campaign for Chevron, which, among many other things, got those outtakes, more outtakes than have ever been obtained in litigation in the history of the United States. And that came from a group that was extraordinarily diverse, but also extraordinarily creative. And this would give a very specific example. We later won Chevron's, Enterprise Diversity Award, and they calculated that 93% of the work that we did in that case, which is a very large case, was done by women or members of minority groups. So that's just a very concrete example of how a diverse team can do work at the highest levels.
I think that mentoring also plays a part in this. I think we've had a lot of success with informal mentoring as opposed to assigning a particular person to mentor someone else. Diversity and inclusion at the end of the day is very personal. Numbers are great. Numbers are very important, but we can't get lost in the numbers. I think that advancement and diversity requires attention on people. If you want to accelerate development and provide them with skills and knowledge and opportunities and network to succeed, there has to be personal mentorship. And I've seen that from the top of our firm to the bottom. I think that's been another reason why we've been able to be so successful, and we've made it a priority. Amanda, have you seen that organic leadership, or do you have any comments about what we're doing?
Yeah, I do, as a matter of fact. I think when you are working with lawyers from very different backgrounds and also different cultures and whose native language and oftentimes is not English, you need to invest more time in order to reach a ground of the kind of synergy that you need in order to develop themes and everything else in the case that you're working on. So, but I do think it requires an accepting and inclusive culture. Because what happens, I think, oftentimes is this practice is a difficult practice, it's a challenging practice. We often are operating in the gray area. The answers are not crystal clear. Oftentimes, in order to be successful, you've got to come up with a different question. And so as a result, it can be more tiring than it would be if everybody's working from a familiarity or a common ground. And so I think that in terms of mentoring, what I've noticed and tried to do in working with the lawyers that I'm working with is really getting to know them and really trying to understand sort of how it is that they arrived at a particular solution to a problem. Because at the end of the day, I think it's very important to have credibility both within your own team, but then also outside. I mean, we're trial lawyers. We take cases to trial. We go in front of juries, and we have to be viewed and understood and accepted as credible. Being able to work in unison with a diverse group requires extra effort because you have to get to know things that are not obvious to you because you don't come necessarily from that background. But that extra work pays off exponentially when you're ultimately delivering a case, in particular to a jury.
Amanda, now that you're describing that, it just makes me think. I just had my 34th anniversary as a lawyer. So when I started, it was a very different time. And I started at what's now one of the largest law firms in the US, which was a large law firm then. And there was a conformity that was just expected. You were to do things as you were told, when you were told, and in the way you were told. And I do think that what you're describing is not an entirely UBU culture, but I think there is an important part to allowing people to be themselves. I really do. But this really brings me to a point that I think is an extraordinarily important practical point. I think we've talked about how, as a matter of fairness and a matter of, business imperative, but how about just from a perspective of wanting to win your trials? We try cases in Miami-Dade County where 2/3 of the population is Hispanic, Spanish-speaking. Obviously, in the major urban areas in the United States, there are major African-American populations. There are populations of Asian backgrounds, of South Asian backgrounds. It's pretty clear to me that it's an imperative to have trial lawyers who can actually connect with the jurors with whom they're speaking, who the juries can see themselves in. And so, just from that very practical, winning-related perspective, I think that's another reason why diversity is so important.
I couldn't agree with you more on two issues. One is that if there's a profession that can really bring the kind of change to the diversity and inclusion that we want to see represented across the professions, it's the legal profession. And that is precisely because, as trial lawyers, we're trained to persuade, and we're also trained to stay in the game, right? We don't throw in the towel, right? We don't have thin skin. And one of the things that happened to me, and I'll never forget it, is that I really wanted a significant role in a jury trial. And the reason I got it was because I was a woman. Because after 2 weeks of, this is a funny way to say it, but white men trying a case, complicated civil jury trial case in the Southern District of Florida in front of a very diverse group, there was a huddle and it said, Amanda, you got to get up there, you've got to do something, right? We have got to wake these people up, right? And diversity does that. Representation does that. The women jurors wanted to see me have a role. I think the same is true of other diverse lawyers. The same is true. I mean, George and I, you and I had an arbitration where one of the lead arbitrators in the international arbitration was a woman. She wanted to see that same role. And when that happens and it works, it's so effective and so powerful. So all I have to say to all of those lawyers that don't think they're getting the shot, you just wait, you stay in the game, and you continue to persuade.
And I got to jump in now because that's a great comment, Amanda. But there's another thing, which is from a purely selfish motive. All you firm leaders out there, if you do sponsor folks who are different from you, there is a good guy halo effect that happens because people know what you do, and it doesn't really matter why you do it, even if it's for a selfish reason. But I tell you what, it feels good to be recognized for being willing to allow people who are not like you to have an important role.
Thanks, Andres and Amanda, for your insights, and thank you for listening to this week's episode. One of my takeaways is that everyone should be invited to the party. But if you're going to invite someone to a party, make sure you include them. Don't just invite them and leave them at the bar to fend for themselves. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, and we hope you join us again next time.